Well, I'm really excited to be with you guys tonight, and we've already had a really great day. We've been here this afternoon, and we met some of your staff, and just heard about your church and your mission and what you're doing here. And we walked in, and we were like, "This is a huge, really beautiful space." So, for those of you, how many people here were part of building this building? Because I know that's pretty recent. So, okay, about maybe half of you. So, I hope that those of you who were part of that do feel just excited when you're here about what God's done in your community and what He's doing with you guys and how He's helping you be part of His work here in this town. And it's really, really encouraging. I don't know if you guys go to a church, like if you're at the beach for vacation and you just go to a different church. I think especially once you become a leader, even if you're a volunteer or on staff, you rarely are with other people in other communities. And it can be really just encouraging and inspiring to remember that God is doing great work all around our country and around this world, and we're all part of something much bigger than ourselves. But for those of you who served the coffee on Sunday morning and your urn broke yesterday and you don't have enough, and the people who want coffee forgot that they were in a church and they seem to have thinking that they're at Starbucks, it can sometimes be hard to remember that we're part of something big and really amazing and glorious, and that is a story that does happen at Hope Church, and we just broke 2 coffee pots, and you would think that we took people's lifeblood away from them before they went into the sanctuary, and when that happens, you just sometimes can forget about what we're really here to do and what we're doing and what we're about. So I'm really glad that I get to come and talk with you guys tonight. I'm going to have a few questions for you as well. And we just have an open time for Q&A after I share what I've brought for you. So please feel free to speak and ask questions of us. I've got my Praxis residents here with us. I'm going to introduce them to you. Praxis is a program we just started at Hope. That's a full-time ministry program to help launch young leaders into ministry. So they work as full-time interns, full-time paid interns for us, for a 10-month program, and this is our first year and our first 5 months. So would you guys stand up real quick so I can introduce you? So Paige right here in the red and black is our worship resident. Whitney is our children's ministry resident, and KJ is our student ministry resident. So for those of you guys who serve in any of those areas, any questions specifically related to those areas, these guys will be happy to answer as well. So, and you're going to hear from them in a little bit. Thank you, guys. So we've had a lot of fun being here together. So I just want to tell you guys a little bit about me, because sometimes or at least for me, I don't know about you, maybe you knew your whole life was going to be about whatever you're doing right now in this church. But for me, this is like a shocking experience. If I could have talked to my 12-year-old self, never in a million billion years did I think that I would be working in ministry. I wanted to be a Supreme Court justice, and I did write to Sandra Day O'Connor when I was 8, and she sent me a picture, and she also signed it. So I was a total nerd. I really had no idea that this was my journey that God would have me on. But sometimes when you look back, you realize why you're passionate about what you're passionate about. And so for me, when it comes to things like environments, it started to make sense. So I've got a picture that will take you back with me to my life. This is my family. I'm the middle one, and we had 4 of us. This is a picture. My youngest brother was recently adopted in this picture. He's from Korea. And my dad was in the Army, and so life was a great adventure, and we moved about every 2 years. I went to 7 schools in 10 years growing up, and as I look back on that, yes, life was a little disheveled, like this picture, a little chaotic, a little messy, and look at my mom's face. I think she's literally like, "Dear God, what happened? Is this my life?" I mean, look at her face. So I love this picture because I think back to that time, and there's certain memories that you have, and one of those for me is just being like a professional newcomer. Like when you go to 7 different schools in 10 years, you become a newcomer all the time, and everything about life is about being the new person. And the other thing that happened is that every time we moved, my parents became believers in their 20s. They were sort of new to faith all through my childhood, and every time we would move, they would kind of church shop. My mom grew up Catholic, my dad grew up without a faith background, so they weren't like drawn to one denomination. So every time we would move, there would be 7 schools, but there would also be like 3 to 10 churches, because every time you move, you're looking for that church, and they were pretty serious about wanting to find this kind of church. So to the extent that I was a professional newcomer at school, I was much more of a professional newcomer in church. I am like the most mutt of a denomination. I have experienced everything. We used to go sometimes Catholic Mass. We would just stay in Catholic Mass in the military chapel, and then it would just become Protestant church right after. Church suppers, Bible studies, Awanas, every kind of experience. I've been to every kind of church Raise your hand if you're new. Stand up if you're new. Feel really awkward if you're new. Be ignored if you're new. Every kind of new experience in a church. And when I hated all of that, honestly. I hated being new. I hated that feeling. I remember once being in 8th grade, moving in the middle of an 8th grade year. For those of you who have middle schoolers, you can imagine, or if you remember what it was to be in middle school, you can imagine what that was like. And it was October of my 8th grade year, and it was the first day in the school cafeteria. October is just enough time for everyone to solidify their friend groups. And I remember walking into that cafeteria, and I'll never forget the feeling of just dread and worry and uncertainty and doubt that comes when you are standing somewhere hoping that you will be invited to sit at a table. And I can remember that like it was yesterday. And I really think that God's given me some of these sort of Polaroid moments that stay in my mind because they give me a great passion for the church. And they give me a lot of passion for the way we do things, for the people that we hope will come. Because every week there's someone, most likely here, who knows that exact feeling, that mix of worry and dread and uncertainty, but somehow they're compelled here and they've come and they want to experience something. And so when I think about that, I start to realize why maybe environments are really exciting to me, and thinking about what we do and how we do it in church life is where God's brought me. So I want to give you a quick definition of environments before we get too into it. And this is because sometimes I think the obvious things are not that obvious, and we should just okay, let's all get our head around what are we talking about when we talk about an environment. This is an aggregate of things that come together. I like the word aggregate because sometimes when you think about church, you might only think about one part of church, but really the experience of coming to this building, and in fact, the experience that people have when it comes to Christian life is not about one thing. It's an aggregate of things. And unfortunately, I think people have as many negative things or things that are obstacles for them when it comes to Christian life as they do positive. So if we only focus on one piece of the story, we're missing the whole environment, the aggregate of things, some of which are in our control, but some of which are not in our control. So that's an aggregate. And then this idea that this is the social and cultural forces that shape a person or a population. Someone might be coming here who has some very strong cultural forces that have shaped what they think about Jesus. You might not know what those are. You might not ever know what those are. But the thing about an environment is there is a complicated mix of factors that bring that to someone's experience. Here's an example of that. I want you to turn to your friend or whoever you're with. Think about a restaurant you really like here in Winston-Salem or Clements. What is the restaurant you like and why do you like it? Really, tell the person, but what do you like about it? Not just why you like it, but what is it about that restaurant that you really like? And I'm going to ask you to share with me. So take a couple minutes. Okay. Is there a consensus? Someone tell me, what's a restaurant a lot of people like? What's it called? Panera. Okay. What was the other one? Shanghai? Okay. Okay. Who likes that restaurant? Okay. Some of you like it. That's good. Okay. What do you like about it? Okay. So it's friendly and the food's really good, right? Okay. So why do you guys like Panera up here? Okay, so you have some memories there that make it probably even better because you're by yourself when you're there. No. So it's but that's a warm environment you like to go to. What is another one that's you guys mentioned? Olive Garden. So what do you like? What about the Olive Garden? The waiters are nice. Do they look nice? The waiters are hot. Also, what else? whatever it takes. Okay, you like the service. Anything else? That's enough for you. The server, you like the server, and you like the bread. right? Consistently, the bread is good. Everyone can agree. Something special about the Olive Garden bread. Anyone else have anything that we haven't said yet? The tavern? A tavern? What do you guys like about that place? Okay, cool. So here's the thing. I really like restaurants. I like Restaurant Impossible. Does anyone watch that show? Okay, so isn't there always, there's three things to a restaurant, right? Sorry about that spit. There's three things. There's the food, right? There's the food, the service, and the atmosphere. That's really the only things that it takes to make a restaurant. Sometimes it seems so simple, but as you guys know, actually having a restaurant that's consistently good on all three of those is really hard. Most restaurants fail. I think it's 9 out of 10 restaurants fail, like not a chain, just a startup restaurant. That's actually the same stat as church plants. Because I think in churches, actually, we are sort of about three simple things too. It's not that complicated. There's a message, there's worship, and there's the experience. That's kind of what we do. We're all sort of doing the same thing all around. You're not having the church down the street isn't like doing something completely different. It's kind of a template that we all follow, just like at a restaurant. I mean, they're really not doing crazy things. They're just trying to serve consistent food, have good service, and have a good environment. But somehow, those simple things are sometimes hard to do. But when we talk about the restaurants that we like, I bring that up. I bring up an idea like, is there a Target here? Does anyone here like to go to Walmart more than they like to go to Target? It's okay, you can tell me. Okay, why do you like Walmart better? Really? Not at my Walmart. So there's a lot of screaming children in your Target? Okay, so you shouldn't work probably in the nursery. What'd you say? The prices are better, yes. What was your Walmart answer? Okay. So it feels a little different to you. Okay, so it feels a little different. It's not the same. Generally, overwhelmingly, and according to the money they make, people prefer Target. Like, Target does really, something's going on. There's an intangible with Target. We all agree. We might not know why, and you may have a good Walmart. My Walmart is a different kind of Walmart that's near my house, but I try to never, ever go there. But it's bright. A lot of people think Target's bright. It's light. Have you been in your remodeled grocery store, Lowe's? It looks like the Wizard of Oz shops there. It's sort of this glassing. So I go in there, and I love it. I'm like, tell me more about your grocery store. Tell me about your remodel. Are more people shopping here? I'm talking to the lady who just really would just wish that I would move along because it's like 10:30 last night. But it was light, and it was bright, and they were obviously after something because environments do matter. But I think something weird happens when we get and cross into church life. Something goes on where we somehow think that that's not as important anymore. And I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if we're worried that we're going to be too commercial or we're too consumer oriented. But I want to submit to you guys tonight, and I'm hoping to show you in Scripture that I actually think that Jesus cared deeply about environments. And I'm going to try to show you those things. But first, I want to talk about this idea that God is sovereign. This is something that I hear said and sort of unsaid, which is, well, we're not in control. God's in control. He's the one who draws people to himself. He's the one who does the work of bringing people to know him. Absolutely true, 100% true. I do believe, of course, that God is sovereign, that God is the one who does the work, that he has a story that he is writing in people's lives, and that he's the one who does that. We don't have to sell him. In fact, high sales-y places are so distasteful. We're not selling him. We're not peddling God. We're not trying to trick people into a relationship with God. God is in control of all these things, and he is beyond all of that. But there's something that we need to not forget when we're talking about God's sovereignty, that when you read the Gospels, the truth of the matter is Jesus' disciples worked their butts off. They had to work really hard. It isn't that they worked hard to get people to believe who Jesus was, but the disciples worked really hard. And you guys are volunteers, so you get this. Think about when he fed the 5,000. So they're like, all we got's 2 loaves and a fish. What do you got? And he's like, well, here, set the people up, organize them. Jesus is like, organize the people. And then those disciples had to distribute all of that food and then pick it all up. About last fall, we had our volunteer kickoff, and we served a dinner. And let's just say that Mose wasn't sure that they needed more than one rectangle table to serve our 300 volunteers at one time. And so they set up one rectangular table and they were going to serve from that. And all of a sudden, like all these guys, these residents sweep in and we're like, we got to do something. And you're working so hard just to feed people. If you've served the coffee, if you've worked in the nursery, you know it's hard work. But somehow I think that we can forget that just because God's sovereign doesn't mean that we should be mediocre. Like that we can accept mediocrity as an okay thing. That we don't have to really work really hard. Because all through Scripture, Jesus is pretty intense, and those disciples have to keep up with where he's going. And he's going places. He's doing things. So I just want to put that argument to the side when we start talking about being really excellent with all the things that we do and why we would do that. I think that we do have to work hard. God is the one who draws people to himself. But I don't know about you, but I do not want to create any obstacles that could keep someone from reaching him. I don't want to be one of the obstacles on their way, even if God's the one who's doing that work. So Jesus used environments. This is a tiny little verse, but it was, of course, very intriguing to me in Mark 3. This is when Jesus is starting his public ministry, and all of a sudden there's all these crowds. He's constantly trying to get away with his disciples and draw away, and at one point the crowds are just following him. And before he starts, he says this, well, because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him. Now, I don't know about you, but the Bible's big, but it's not that big to be the thing that we are building our lives upon. Like, there's not that many words in there for a whole history of people to follow and know God. So I feel like every word in there matters. So when I read a sentence like that, I'm like, look, before he started, he stopped. He evaluated the situation and he made moves to make sure that everybody could hear the message. Sometimes for us, we have to remember that the message that we're sending to people starts in the parking lot. And there are many, many messages that people receive before they get here. And I think Jesus was pretty intense about people hearing his message. And he made moves, intentional moves, to make sure that people could hear it. And you may think, oh, wow, that's just a tiny little verse. But there's not that many words. And those words are there. And you see him do those things, tiny little things, but things nonetheless, things that were recorded, things about his intentionality about the way that he reached out to people. He evaluated the situation around him. He spoke to the context. He considered the real needs of people when he was with them. So when I think about some of my newcomer experiences in churches, I sometimes feel like people have gotten so comfortable that they've forgotten about the real needs of people, that people need to feel safe and secure, that for every person who wants to talk to you when they come through the door, there might be a person who doesn't, and that's okay. There's something in all of us that kind of likes the rules. We sort of want to know that we're doing the right thing at the right time. And recently I was at Hope, and I was just with my family, so I was sitting sort of in the back corner over here. Just very rare that I'm just in the church sitting with my kids in the pew, but I was sitting in a chair. And so it was very full, and we're trying to handle a lot of people every time, and that's stressful. And if you're an usher and you're trying to get people seated, that's hard. It's a hard job. I recognize that. So the person in front of me had a few seats, and the usher came up, and he came to seat people in those seats. I mean, we're 3 songs into the worship set. It's getting hard to seat people, and we're already now kind of heading towards overflow, but we're trying to fill all the seats. So this group comes in, and he's ready to seat them, and the woman looks at him and says, actually, these seats are saved. And he hesitates, and he says, well, I think you can only save them for 3 more minutes, and then I'm going to need you to give them up. And I'm like, ooh, I just died on the inside. I just died. And I reached for it, and I'm like, excuse me. We're so glad you're here. We're just really glad you're here. And I love that guy. I love that usher. He's a great guy. He's in a stressful situation, and he's trying to get people seated. I get that. But all of us have a tendency to start to just want to follow the rules and get the thing done and forget sometimes that these are real people with real needs. And we don't need that woman who may or may not know Jesus to now have to handle how she feels about the usher who told her that her family can't sit with her. It's just one of those things. It happens all the time. And it's not that we're going to do it all right, but getting our heart situated to remember that these are people who have stories and they need to feel safe. You know, sometimes another analogy I'll give about Christianity is politics. I'll say, how comfortable do you feel expounding upon your belief system, what party you're in, why you're in it, all the things you think about it. Do you ever enter into a room where people are very versed in politics and you're thinking, just, excuse me, I missed that class in 5th grade. I just am not real comfortable with where I stand. That's sometimes how people, I think, feel when they come into the church. You know, people are using certain words and saying certain things, and they're not familiar with that language, and they don't talk like that, and it's different for them. And think about adult learning. This is a very unusual situation. You don't do this very much if you don't come to church. You know, when you sing up to sing, they hear words that maybe aren't familiar to them, and they don't understand why we use all these big Christian-y words all the time. You know, we got to reach people where they are and help them feel comfortable and assume that they're uncomfortable, and that we're there to help them make them feel comfortable. So Jesus cared about environments. He was intentional with the way that he used them. One more verse to kind of set this up is from Romans 14. And it says, make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in your brother's way. This is kind of my orienting verse about environments at Hope and the things that we do. I like this verse because you'll notice that there is an intentional action required. Anytime I think that Scripture makes something really intentional, I assume that if we're not intentional, we'll do the opposite. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're going to make up your mind in the front of it, you've got to assume that our natural drift will be to do that. And all through Scripture, you see this happening. As soon as the early church starts to move, as soon as they start to grow and they've got all these believers coming in, they're like, we don't want to take care of those widows. We just want to take care of these. And I'm not sure I'm really comfortable with them eating that food sacrificed to idols, but there's all of this starting to happen as soon as the church begins to grow. And it's in this context that this verse is said, and it makes me think that if you don't make up your mind to do that, you will be an obstacle. Now, I know that's hard to hear because you may not think of yourself that way, but I catch myself all the time, you guys. I'm around church all the time. All I do is church all the time. And I find myself sometimes saying things a certain way to like a friend or a neighbor where I'm thinking, she's not getting this. This is not helping her. People don't go around talking about my Redeemer lives like on the street corner in your neighborhood. That's just not words that people use. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Do you get that? You know, I was with someone recently, and they were like, well, I don't know anyone who's not a believer. I was like, are you sure? Are you sure? Did you have a bagger today at the grocery store? You never talk to anyone who's not a believer? Are you sure? Because if so, you might want to expand your social circle a little bit, because that's not doing anything. We've got to be out there. And I'm preaching to me as much as I am to you guys. This will be your reality. You'll do this if you're not intentionally trying to make sure everything you do, the way you live your life, the way you go about your business in town, whatever you're doing, and then when you come here to serve, we will do this if we're not careful. We do have to be intentional, and we'll just slide this direction without even knowing it. Sometimes an environment can do that. I was recently, we were sort of looking at what Hope was like, and we set up this thing. I had a new leadership team, and I said, you guys, we got to know what messages we're sending to people. We're too comfortable here. We don't know what messages we're sending before the message because this is our home. You know, you don't really know. Have you ever done that? If you've sold your home, you know that a real estate person comes in and they're like, oh no, this color's all wrong. This room is too cluttered. You've got to take that stuff out of there. And all of a sudden you're like, this place is a pigsty. I didn't even realize it. You know, it just looks completely different through someone's eyes who's looking that way. So one of the things that we did is we had a little secret shopper experience where we had a Mission Impossible questionnaire that we stuck in a little folder. And we had some people that we knew. We asked people, we said, do you know anyone who's relatively new here, who's honest? And so we gave out this folder to these people who were relatively new, and we asked them to just tell us about their experience from the moment they drove into the parking lot until they left. So we get all this feedback, and it was so helpful. Sort of about our parking, I'm so glad I get to slog through the mud before I come in here, and like, it's too loud, it's too dark, you can't find a seat. Just all this stuff that was really helpful to hear. And so I had a friend of mine who's not a believer, who doesn't come to our church, but she is an interior sort of designer. She's good at that kind of stuff. And I said to my friend, I said, Whitney, will you just come to Hope one day? I know this isn't your deal. I'm not going to sell you Jesus. Just, will you come one day and tell me what you think? And so I said, can you come through here? So she comes through the doors, and she stands there, and she's like, I have no idea where to go. She's like, is the auditorium, wait, what do you call it? What is it called, a sanctuary? I go to an Episcopal church. Is the auditorium down there? I said, no, that's the bathroom. She goes, I don't know where to go, and this is so confusing to me. I am really confused. What do I do with my kids? And she said, and I want to look up, and there's nothing to direct me up here. And so we stood there for a few minutes, and she just walked me through her experience of what it felt like to walk into the doors. So don't you know it? We put a sign up. We put a directional sign up. We warmed up the place. She helped me a lot. She came back. And I love this. We came and we played in the nursery. She had one of her little kids with her. And she's like, oh, man, Will keeps asking when we can come back to Hope. I'm like, guess you're going to have to come back. So she hasn't yet, but that's beside the point. One day I'll tell this story and she will have come back. But it was so great to remember that there's messages before the message. And what I felt from Whitney was a lot of like, whoa, I'm confused. This is overwhelming. This space is huge, and I don't even know where to go. That's a lot of messages before she got even close to sitting in here. And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. How do we intentionally make up our minds to remove any obstacle, to help people feel comfortable, to find a seat and hear the message, to make sure that we're just really aware of what messages we're sending before the main message? That's the way we treat people at the coffee, at the restrooms, when we seat them, in the parking lot, our greeters, our information. It's all of it. It's you. Whatever you do. Do you talk to people you don't know? Are you the person who says, I am here to meet people and I want to make people feel warm and welcome? I don't need anyone to ask me to do that. I care about how people feel, and I don't want anyone to come through here and not be spoken to on a morning. So a couple of practical things. So this is follow the rules of engagement. This is just the idea that there are certain social ways that we act with people and do things. And sometimes we get into Christian life and we go a little weird and do things differently than that. And we stop remembering that there's certain ways that we interact with people that are super helpful to help them feel comfortable. And so David Dwight, our senior pastor, he likes to say, make your natural life spiritual and your spiritual life natural. You don't have to come in here and act different and use big words or feel like you have to be real sweet and you weren't sweet at all in the parking lot, but you're going to be sweet now that you're here. We can just let our natural life be spiritual and our spiritual life be natural. And so when we're going to follow the rules of engagement, I really think that there's 3 questions that we can ask about what we're trying to do when we're creating an environment. So here's the first one. Who are you expecting? What does it seem like you're expecting? Who do you want to have come? I remember going to teach a women's retreat, and I said, who's going to be there? And they were like, well, it'll be different people, whatever. I said, will there be anyone there who's not a believer? And they're like, no. And I thought, how do you know that? Do you know that our churches are full of people who haven't really begun a relationship with Christ? They're willing to come and fill a chair, but we don't know where they are in that relationship. There's a sense of who are you expecting? And do you act like you're expecting people to be here who aren't believers? Do you act in your nursery that you're expecting people to be here who are first time? In fact, the first time visitor experience is so normal, it seems like, of course, there's always first time visitors. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Are you creating spaces that make it seem like you're expecting those people to be there? A friend of mine told me a story, and she's Catholic, and she said that and if you're familiar with the Catholic faith, you know that there can become a lot of guilt associated with you have to be at Mass every week. And so this priest apparently said at a Christmas Eve service, he said, you know what? There's a lot of you here today, and we're so glad you're here. And if you haven't been here in a while, I just want you to know that I am really glad that you're here today. And whenever you come back, we're going to be really glad that you're here again. And I thought, you know what? That priest just did a ton of work in some people's hearts by addressing the fact that he knew that they were there and they weren't there last week, and he was happy about it. He was fine with it. Every week when we come up on the stage at Hope, we say our names. I just never assume that people know who I am because I don't know if everyone, I don't need to assume that. And we say every week, my name's Nicole and I'm part of this team, and I want you to know that if this is your first time here, I am really, really glad you're here. That's saying, hey, we know that, and we want to address that. We expect you to be here. We expect you to have questions. We expect you to be confused sometimes about the experience. That's okay. We're not going to pretend like we've got it all together and just enter into our machine. We're just going to be ourselves. So who are you expecting is the first one. The second one is, what is success? Now, when I first gave this talk, I was like, I just want to call this talk what is your win? And they were like, ooh, no, that's too not Christian enough. And I was like, okay, then we'll make it a really long title with a lot of big words in it so people feel like I know what I'm talking about. But what I really want to say is it's just about what's the win of what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to say that you're all competing against each other. It's not that kind of win. It's like, what are you hoping will happen? And so when I go to retreats or speak at other churches, I'll say, what are you hoping will happen? What do you want to have happen? And a lot of times I'll hear things like, we want everybody to come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, and everyone's going to commit their life in a huge, massive way and give all their money. And I'm like, those are great. Of course we want all those things. But for this 1 hour experience, what are you hoping is going to happen? Meaning, what do you want people to say when they leave? If they were going to turn to their friend and say something, what are you hoping that they would say? Of course, all those things are good goals, but sometimes we need just the little goal. What are we trying to accomplish here today in this event? When we plan an event, what do we want to have happen? What are we hoping people will be saying or feeling? We did a women's event last year, and I said to the team, what do you want to have happen? Seriously, if you guys all had to say. And one of the girls said, I want women to have fun, and I want them to leave thinking, I feel like I was understood. I said, you know what? That is a great goal. Let's make sure that we create an experience that does that. We don't have to do everything in 1 hour. We're going to make a lot of headway if we have some people who've never been in this church leave thinking, that was unexpectedly fun, and I feel understood. That's one of the best things we could do, because that's getting them to the message. We're hopefully sending a message before we get to the next message. And on that evening at that women's event, there were 37 women in that room who had never been in our church building before. So I thought, you know what? This is for those 37. If those 37 women think, oh, I laughed unexpectedly, I thought this was going to be all stodgy and serious, and I sort of feel understood, then the hope is that they would be willing to come again, that maybe we just removed just a couple obstacles from their experience about what church is really like so that they might come back again. And that's a great goal. So you might want to ask yourself on your ministry team, what is success? You may want to ask your ministry leader if you're a volunteer on your team, what would you think would be success for us? If we're serving coffee, whatever, what do we want to do? All of our ministry teams know that we're trying to get people a seat and a place to see, and we want them to feel greeted and like they're welcome here. We have a thrift store at Hope. It's been a really fun, unexpected ministry that we have, that we never had in our mind that we would do a thrift store, but it's been a cool place. So there's a guy who works at the thrift store. His name's Wayne. He is a volunteer there. There's 2 managers, and the rest is all volunteers. And Wayne told me a story recently. There was a woman who came into the thrift store, and eventually, over time, he invited her to come to Hope. She never goes to church. So she was like, takes a couple times. It's like an intervention. You have to sort of be like, oh, no, one more time. Are you sure? Maybe this time. You want to come? So finally, she says yes, probably just to get the guy to stop asking her. So she comes with him, and she walks through our concourse, which is like a long hallway to get to the auditorium. And he tells the story that she really was only 3/4 of the way in to get into the worship service, where she said to Wayne, I've got this figured out. I've got you guys figured out. And he was like, surprising. Tell me more. So he said, what do you mean? She goes, I know what's different about this place. Everybody here wants to be here. Think about that for a second. What kind of church experience has she had that makes her think that this place is different because everyone here wants to be here? From the volunteer perspective, the people. I mean, I couldn't hear a better thing than that. I don't know where she is. I don't know about other experiences at Hope or if it's ended up being the best place for her, because we do a lot of things not great. I mean, it's not great. But that one thing, that one day, that's like a win. If someone comes in and thinks the way people act and interact and the way they treat each other, they all want to be here. That's awesome. That's all it needs to be for that day. That's success. That's exciting. So you really want to ask yourself that question. Really think about it. What is success for your team? For an event, for a morning, for a Sunday morning, for a children's room? What does success look like? So that you can start to go after that and feel good about getting there. We can all do those little pieces to get there. So the final one is, how will you get there? So, okay, what are you trying to do? Who are you expecting? What will success look like? Now, how are you going to get there? What are going to be the steps to get you from that place to that place? What's going to change to make that happen? And this is one of those things that is fun to talk about about how we go about that at Hope. Now, we don't do everything well at all, as my Whitney story and my usher, and there's all that stuff going on. But one of the things we like to say when I talk with the Praxis residents and we're getting ready to plan things, like a student ministry event, for instance, we'll plan it on the 5-minute. Every 5 minute, we're going to plan it. We did a volunteer kickoff starting at 8. Every 5 minutes was planned out. And let me tell you, that is a labor of love. If you're going to try to plan an event on 5-minute increments, it is really tiring and it's hard to do. But what we like to say is we don't want to choose the good, if it's a good thing or the best thing, we want the best thing. So what's the good thing in this situation and what's the best thing? This summer, we had a college ministry event that was coming up, and I came in to see as they were setting up, and we had one of our interns was setting up, and we had talked about good thing versus best thing. So I see him putting Snapple bottles out. We talk about how we like to give college students like a drink to hold because holding a drink helps you feel more comfortable, and we like to give them a drink that's a little bit expensive because they probably can't buy it themselves. So we usually buy like Starbucks Frappuccinos or like Snapples in the bottle, and that's what we'll give them, and we actually like spend money on Snapples in the bottle because we want to do that. We want them to feel comfortable, and we want them to walk in and be like, if it's their first time sweet, like a Snapple, you know? So he's putting the Snapples out on a table, and I said, Brandon, what are you doing? He said, I'm putting the Snapples out. I said, where's the ice? He goes, oh, I ran out of time because we were supposed to put it in a bucket with ice and stick them in there. I said, Brandon, if you came to this event, do you want to drink a warm Snapple? If you were here for the first time and you came here, do you want a warm Snapple? And he's like, Dun, I'll go get the ice. I was like, all right, great. That would be great. But you know what I'm saying? That's like just a simple thing. And you might think, wow, that is really nitpicky. But I'm like, but do you want to drink a warm Snapple? If you're coming to an event, do you want to feel like people prepared for you and they were excited that you were coming? Those are the little things, but they're little things that matter. So right after that had happened, we were trying to hang a sticky whiteboard in the Praxis room. And so I'm like annoyed. It's the end of the day and I'm frustrated. And I'm like, we don't need a measuring tape. Just roll it on there. And Paige, our Praxis resident, is like, Nicole, do we want to do the good thing or the best thing? And I'm like, ugh. So we go get the measuring tape and we line it up so we can put it up there right. And I was like, yes, it's working. But it's a simple thing, but you're like setting up the nursery, you know? You come into the nursery. We used to be in a school. You guys did too. We used to be in a math classroom. I would set up the 2-year-old room. I was a volunteer. A 2-year-old room, it was a math high school classroom where all you're doing is trying to help 2-year-olds not kill themselves by pulling overhead projectors down from the live wire outlet that's right there. I mean, it is not exactly the ideal environment. It's not. It's hard to overcome. And I would come in there and think like, okay, I'm a parent of a young kid. What can I do to make this the best thing? So for me, it was always have the music on. Always have the CD player on. Put the music on. Make it seem like I got here before you. I put the music on and I am ready for your child. You may not think that that matters to you at all. That may not mean anything to you. But sometimes it's the small things that say, we knew you were coming, we're prepared for you, and we know you're going to be a little uncomfortable leaving your child in the room with the overhead projector and the very dirty floor, but we put the music on, and we are ready. Like, we're excited. It's a party in here. You know, it's little things like that. It's the room, it's the setup, it's the environment, it's being there on time, being there early. It's not huddling up when you're the 2 ushers and it seems like all you want to do is catch up with each other because honestly, you're a little uncomfortable because you don't really want to talk to people you don't know. You know, I've said to my friends before at Hope, please don't expect for me to talk to you on Sunday morning. I know that sounds mean, but we are friends. We can talk another time. And when we're here, we are on. We are meeting people, and this doesn't have to mean that you got 1 million new people coming every week. There are people coming here right now who are lonely, who are disengaged, and who probably aren't believers. They're all here, you know. And if not, even if your congregation stayed completely stable, do you know what's actually growing in your church? Your children. They're growing up here. They're growing into a relationship with Christ. Even if you added not one to your number, you're adding children to your number. And you don't want to be a church that's letting those guys go because you just stopped being intentional about the environment, about saying we're excited to be here. We love being here. We prepared for you. We put the Snapples on ice because Snapples taste good when they're cold. They don't taste good when they're warm. It's the little things like that. How are we going to get there? You might have to do 5-minute increments. You might need a secret shopper. You might need fresh eyes in that space. Looking around and being like, wow, those toys are junky. And we need to clean them or we need to get new ones. And even if you're the volunteer and you have a leader, go tell your leader that. You know, a lot of your leaders are waiting for you to tell them what you're passionate about. because they're tired too. They need your energy and your vision. Even better, tell them that you'll be the one to go get the new stuff. Don't even leave it for them to do. Say, I got an idea and I want to do something here because I just want this to be really cool. We need new Play-Doh and I'll go get it. You know, whatever that thing is, where you can say, I want this environment to be as good as it can be because I am sending a message before they get in here. And I want to be part of sending a message that really matters and that says the same thing that we're saying in here. We say we care, we say that God is creative and he's expansive and he loves you and he's after you, but we don't really work real hard out there. But God loves you and we care about it and we've built our life on it, but we're tired. You know, we want to send the same message everywhere we go, y'all. We're building our lives on the fact that Jesus Christ came to seek and save the lost. We're building our lives on the idea that we are messengers of reconciliation, that God, in his infinite wisdom and craziness, thought that we should be ambassadors of his message, us. So if you're surprised to be here like I am, just know that God's the one who said, this is you. You represent me. And we spend a lot more time doing a lot of great things in a lot of other places sometimes, and we forget that all the little things matter. And that we get to do that we're all part of sending that message, that you guys are as important as your worship team, your pastor. They send a message, he sends a message, and all of you send a message too. So we want to align those messages all the time, as much as we can, that you're important, that you guys are important. What you do is really important, that there's no way to do what happens in here without everything that happens week to week, between Sundays, before 9:15, after 11:30, the ones who empty the trash, the ones that clean the coffee pots, that's all part of it. We're living stones being built into a spiritual house. That's from 1 Peter. I love that idea that that's what he's doing here. And it's exciting. And if it doesn't feel exciting to you, maybe switch on to a new team, bring fresh eyes, and get excited about something else. Because there's a ton to be done, and it's great work, and it's fun to do it together. So that's kind of what I have for you guys today. And I can tell you more stories. I want to tell you about one slide that I think is right there, if I have it, the next slide. It's this one right here. It's not a good slide because it's from my iPhone, but we had a missions month at Hope. And what we do in a missions emphasis is we have a sermon series about our God's heart for the world, and we usually have an expression of that, whether it's a giving or an event or something that goes around that. So in this missions month, we were focused on the issue of the slave trade all around the world and the fact that that's a real thing and that God's heart is for the oppressed. And so we had a volunteer team that was part of this. And these guys on this volunteer team, these 20-somethings were like, we have a really cool idea. And they had this idea to string light bulbs. It really was just a light bulb on a wire all down from the rafters, 27 of them to represent the 27 million people who are currently in slavery today. Well, I'm thinking, I don't know how that's going to work, but these guys are excited about, they're passionate about, they want to do something to the environment, so I'm like, go for it. Well, we needed an electrician. It took 20 times longer than they expected. It was really hard, super hard to do. But when I stood on the stage and said, do you guys see these 27 lights? These represent the 27 million people still in slavery today. It was like so powerful. It was not an idea I had. I didn't ask anyone to do it. Nobody on the staff thought of it. Volunteers worked really hard to make it happen, and it was awesome. It was awesome. Was it worth it? Was it worth the money and the time? It's easy when you're not there to be like, really? They spent like 30 hours getting those light bulbs to hang there for a three-week sermon series? Yeah. And for 3 weeks during that whole sermon series, everybody in there knew what those light bulbs were about. It was a tangible reminder of this really hard thing that exists in our world that we can be part of. And at the end, we had just an opportunity to give. And we raised over $30,000 for IJM. Now, how much was it worth it? Was it worth the time? It's an environment thing. But I think it moves people in a certain way. And you never know what that thing's going to be, if it's the little cups of goldfish or it's the 27 light bulbs in the stage. It's the little things that matter and make this message come together. So that's one of my favorite stories about hope, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about some of those things. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts, comments? You want to tell me something that you think is done really well here? I'd love to hear it. Anything around this idea of how you send these messages and create these environments? Oh, I can. I was in student ministry, so I'll talk about student ministry for sure. Anyone? Yes. Thank you, Andrew.
So, what are some of the triggers?
The microphone.
What are some of the triggers around hope that let you know that it's time to relook at an environment?
Well, that's a really good question because we're new like you guys. I don't know. I didn't tell you that part of the story. Hope started in 1997. We spent 11 years in schools, and then we moved into our building in whatever that would be, when that would be, 2008. So we've just been in our building for a few years. So it's when you work really hard to build a building, it's really hard to want to start changing it. Like you feel like it just was built. Like why would it need to change already? You know? But you forget that people see it differently. So the start of that for us was that idea of like, who are some of these new people? I need to find some honest people that will give me some honest feedback about their experience here. And you kind of need unknown people who know, who sort of can come and go without, it can't be your staff person or an elder. It's got to be someone else. We did take our whole leadership team at one point. These guys did it, our Praxis residents. They came to all the services at Hope the first weekend they were there, and they took notes. They sat in different places. They came in different entrances. They experienced it from a different place. It was interesting. I just happen to remember that Paige said that like everyone around her was like on their phones. Like from the stage when you're leading worship, you have no idea that people in the back are like writing their grocery list. Just a reminder that everyone's not experiencing it the same way. Just because the first 3 rows think that it's like the most amazing thing they've ever experienced doesn't mean that the back 40th row is super into it. It's distracting and hard. We talked about it. We're like, at some point, if you sit in a different seat, if you come at a different time, one of the things I hadn't done in forever was come right at 11. Drive up at 11, because that's when your newcomers are coming. If your service was at 11, that's what time our service is. And I'm like, this is awful. I can't find a spot. It's so confusing. It took 15 minutes to get into the building, which means I missed the first 15 minutes of the music. I got in. It was dark. I'm short. They're tall. It was not pleasant. So I could experience that just myself, just by changing a few of my own patterns. But we also had a group of people do the same thing. Different services, sit in different seats, experience it, what's good, what's bad. Sometimes all you need is a prompt for yourself, and you're like, okay, parking, front door, sitting, music, message. You just sort of like, okay, I'm going to make a note about each of these experiences and what it is. And it wasn't because we were doing a ton of stuff wrong. It just was one of those things where, well, it's been 5 years that we've been here, and we want to kind of know what it feels like. We forget what it feels like because we've been here for a while. So you need someone with a fresh perspective to do that. Anything else? Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh man, I love our ushers so much. They have a hard job because I think you guys had a big Sunday recently and you're full, and you're trying to be confident and help people get seated and all of that. I think that for us, I just always remind the ushers about the heart of it because for us anyway, the people who are attracted to being ushers are good at like air traffic control and they're good at helping all that happen. And sometimes those people need a reminder to bring the heart to it, and that they're sometimes the only person that a person talks to when they come. So stopping, they want a seat, and you definitely want to get them a seat, but being like, hey, we are really glad you're here. Really, one of the things I notice about people is that people don't look at each other in the face. People don't really look. And to really stop and be like, hey, and maybe Susie, I'm so glad you're here this morning. With sincerity, like you really mean it. Like you're actually glad. Like maybe she has something that she needs to hear this morning. Maybe it was really hard for her to get there. I try to tell ushers to always assume the best in people. Like think of the worst case scenario of what could have happened before a person came. So when they snap at you and they're rude, just imagine like the worst day ever that they already had. And it isn't because they're trying to be mean, but their dog died on the way and they also got in a car wreck, and whatever you have to think of that helps you like have a heart for people. Like it's okay that this person's acting this way. Like I just want to get them a seat. I think that helps. I sometimes tell the ushers, because they are so competent at what they do and they're good at that, they sometimes need that reminder to also kind of bring that heart, that they are sometimes the only presence that someone might experience in our church. So their role is really important. But they're awesome, and they always want to be there. They're great. I'm sure you guys are great too. What else? Yes. Uh-huh. Okay. Mm-hmm. So our college ministry meets in the summers only. That's sort of what we have. And what we've done with that, we've done in the building and in a home. Because in a home can be an obstacle for people. I don't know about you, again, professional newcomer. So when I was in college, I'm looking at a thing and I'm like, if you think for 1 second, I'm going to show up at somebody's house, I'm going to get there, there's going to be 2 people, they're going to hold me there for 2 hours, there's going to be no exit route, and it's going to be terrible and horrible, I can't go to someone's house. So there's that part of it, but then you know that like a home environment can be awesome and create like a great experience. So sometimes for us, we'll have the first event in the building because it's safe, because people can drive away and you might not see them. And there's something about it that feels safer than a home, and then move it into a home. But even when we had it in a home, we actually had signs that we put in the grass. Ours is called the U. So we would have a U sign in the grass. It's like, hey, if you're here for this, we know you're coming. We're expecting you, and you're not going to walk into like a really weird, 2 people there. And I had a group of college students who would be there early, who would stay like outside. So it's kind of like, hey, don't drive away. We're here, we're cool, there's 6 of us, you're safe. Like, you could come. Because you just don't want that to be the case, but I really like the home environment a lot. So you we sort of walk that line in and out of the building, depending on what. And when we had it in the building, we actually pulled all of our furniture into the multipurpose room so that it would be like couches and chairs. Is that hard? Yeah, it's hard. It stinks to pull all the furniture into the multipurpose room. We don't have a facilities guy. We don't have anyone to help us. We got to move all the furniture ourselves. But it feels like an environment you want to be in. And we were like, we don't want to do chairs, like black chairs, like you're at school, So those are the kind of things that we've done. I don't know if we've done it perfectly. We keep experimenting, but that's one thing, was I like the signs that are like, you're in the right place. This is the house. So, anything else? All right. Yes. Oh, thank you. I couldn't see you through the lights. Uh-huh.
Hello, test, test, test. Anyway, I have this wonderful this wonderful girl that's on our ushering our rotation. And last week, she, of course, when somebody comes in a suit,
You know.
to our church, we know they're
You're like,
newcomers.
you're here for a
'cause we're
baptism
casual.
or
Yeah.
you've never been here before.
Whatever. And she came up to me in a frenzy. She's like, "Oh, I met this wonderful man. He was his first time here," and she goes, I was a little nervous because I just didn't want him to think that our church is all led by teenagers and this and that. And I'm like, Diane, the most wonderful thing you ever did was you go up and you're having a conversation with him and you're talking and you're saying, I just want you to know that your worship service, our worship service is a new thing to, just for today, as for the youth. And I said, don't worry. I said, he's going to understand the most important thing is you came up and you talked to him. Mm-hmm. And she was all in a frenzy about it. Oh, I hope he doesn't think that's so I think that sometimes just going to talk to somebody and not worrying so much about the little things is, really the most important thing.
Absolutely. And, you forget that there's a crowd mentality that develops if it's a crowded moment. Like you sort of go into airport mode where no one's really talking to anyone, but there's a lot of people there. Yeah. And there's a lot of people here who will start to do that. And you guys are the ones who break down those walls and make sure that you turn and say like, hey, I'm Nicole. Like I just will walk around. Hey, I'm Nicole. Nice to meet you. How long have you been here? Of course, people hate to say that because the person's like 16 years. I'm like, cool. So glad to meet you today. But that's not a reason to not meet somebody. But it does keep people from doing it. And you can teach your leaders that. You can't teach other people. They will follow your lead. So, we would say from the front sometimes, hey, we hope that you're meeting people. If you feel like you're new here, we're all new here. You guys can say that too in some ways. I mean, this is a young church. We're all new here, so just go ahead and introduce yourself to somebody. Don't wait for someone to introduce themselves to you. We did a video it was called it was an awkward video. And we were trying to address the fact that we knew that people felt like it was hard to connect at Hope. We totally had heard that. We had gotten feedback, secret shopper feedback, that it was hard to connect at Hope. And we didn't want to act like we did have it all together about that. So we made this funny video that we showed in church. Basically, one guy went around and everything he did was awkward. He just kept trying to introduce himself in really awkward ways, but we made it really like the extreme. So the first scenario is he is asking a woman who is holding clearly like a 1-week-old baby if he can hold her baby. But he is also eating a cookie at the same time, so the crumbs were falling onto the baby. And we just and then he tries to pick up someone inside the sanctuary. He is like, hey, you new here? And her husband comes in and sits next to her. So we try to think of things that were way out there so we wouldn't make anyone feel bad. He stands at the coffee bar and asks someone if they want a piggyback ride to the auditorium. And so people loved it. They thought it was so funny. But one of the things for us was let's just poke fun at the fact that we know that you've told us that it's hard to connect here, and let's help you know what to do. So we were like, hey, it sort of said trouble connecting, join a group, join a team. That's the best way to connect here at Hope. And it was one of those just lighthearted, unexpected, fun ways to say, hey, if you feel like you're new here and you feel like it's cliquey, that's hurting my heart, and I'm very sad about that, but let's do something about it. Let's at least address it, that's an issue. That's an issue for us at Hope. That may not be for you guys, but for us, that was one of the ways we just tried to do something. Just sometimes it's just a few words. It's absolutely the intentional conversations with people. Like when my usher, well-meaning usher, tried to take people's seats, and I just leaned forward and I was like, hey, I'm Nicole. We're just really glad you're here. I'm super excited to meet your family when they sit down next to you, when they get finished parking the car in the field, which is why they're not in here in the first place. So, it's those little actions where we say, I'm going to be the one who says hi. I'm going to be the one who makes sure that I've made someone feel comfortable. So thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions or thoughts? Yes. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Are you referring directly to? Yeah. Oh, sure. She asked if a student has been in an environment where it's felt cliquey and hard, does that last for a long time or can that pass? Are you talking specifically in the ministry context? Okay. Yeah, that's hard. You don't know how people are going to react to a difficult situation. And we have to have grace for each other and for the fact that we're just a church full of people who are all messed up. We're not going to do it perfectly. We're not. Of course, it grieves you when that happens, but it does happen because it's human nature. And in fact, it's exactly my last point that I was going to bring up about how normal that is to develop that in-here mentality and this kind of us mentality. And believe me, I served in student ministry as a volunteer and on staff for quite a while, and so have experienced all of that. And it hurts and it's hard, but you're also dealing with kids. And part of dealing with kids is sometimes helping them navigate the rocky parts of what human nature is all about. And how we do that and how we help people. We can't necessarily expect our students to be perfect at reaching other students. We do the best that we can, and we try to address it, but it happens. This is where I do lean into God's grace, his sovereignty, and what he can do. If we get too caught up that we're what it's all about, that's why I started with God is sovereign. He's the one who does the drawing. If we get too caught up in it being perfect, then we'll forget that we're not in control, and that God uses all kinds of situations and circumstances to bring people to himself. In fact, I would argue that some of my hardest newcomer, cliquey, not fitting in, and hating this experience made me want to do ministry. So who am I to say what someone's doing? Sometimes we have to give a little bit of that, hey, we're going to do the best we can. We have to love the aggressor as well as the victim the best we can because both of them are broken and struggling. But at some point, we do have to say, okay, we're going to pursue this, and we want to go after the heart. We want to help deal with the heart, but that God, we have to believe that God's bigger than this, that his story will continue for this student after this, and that sometimes students leave student ministry, and that the whole world does not rise and fall on that student coming to student ministry, that God is really creative and continues to reach kids in lots of different ways. We've had lots of students leave our student ministry. Our student ministry went from small to large, and we're a ragtag bunch of renegades to we are super cliquey, super popular. It happens. and you want to figure out what to do about it, but it's hard. And you just remember that we're all sort of teenagers on the inside. We might be better at masking it, but in some ways we struggle with lots of the same things. We just try to love them the best we can with where they are. A lot of times we get our students who struggle in student ministry, we try to help them serve, like in children's ministry or on a team, because it might be a better, safer fit for them for wherever they are in life. And that's a great thing. I love that. I mean, I'm happy with that. I consider a student who's serving as a student who's engaged, even if they never came back to youth group. Some of our kids who have the hardest time serve on some of the greatest teams. They're back in the sound booth. They work in children's ministry. They help with different things. They serve in the coffee ministry with their parents. I'm like, you know what? They're still coming, and I'm just glad they're here. So that's kind of how we handle that. Anything else? Okay, so Luke 9 is kind of my last sort of point. I was just reading in my devotions a few months ago, and I came upon just this quick 10 verses in Luke, and I just hadn't noticed it before. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you guys, but it's sort of just nestled in here amongst some other stories that you'll be familiar with. But it starts off with one you're probably familiar with, where the disciples are arguing about who's the best, and Jesus calls a little child to stand among them. But it's not just that story. It's actually these three incidents that they chose to put right together that the Lord thought should be just written this way. So right after he says, hey, no, it's not about that. It's not about who's the greatest. It's about little children and welcoming them into the kingdom. Then next it says that John then said to him that, hey, we saw this guy driving out demons in your name. Now listen to this. And he's not one of us. And Jesus was like, no, don't stop him. Whoever is not against you is for you. But then the very next verse. So we've gone, who's the greatest? The disciples are arguing, who's the greatest of us? Now John's like, hey, there's a guy driving out demons in your name, but he's not one of us. And then the next thing that happens is they walk through a Samaritan town, and the town is rejecting them and doesn't want them to come through. And so James and John then say, hey, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy them? So I don't know. It's like the object lesson didn't get through on the first two times. So they're walking with him, and they're like, who's the greatest of us? Wait a second, this little child. Then they get to the second point, and they're like, hey, this guy doing this stuff, he's not one of us. He's using your name, and he's not one of us. And then they're like, this town just rejected you. Do you want us to call down fire because they're not one of us? And at this point, Jesus turns and rebukes them. And I'm not a Greek scholar, but I believe that what that word means is shut up. Like it's a strong, emphatic Greek word that's like, shut up. 3 times what happens here is that it becomes an in here mentality. It's about us. What happens is that the disciples go from this place to this place real quick. Now, here's the thing. I love these stories because they're full of just life and humanity. But more than anything, I truly believe that every story of an encounter with Jesus is a story about us, because it says that Jesus knew what was in people. He knew human nature. This isn't about disciples being dumb. In fact, it's very interesting to me that the disciples that are mentioned here are among Jesus' closest disciples. They are walking with him and listening to him and seeing the way he does things, and they still forget. I believe that there's always a dynamic in all of us that wants to do this. It's just there. It just becomes about us. How do we keep it us? Who's the greatest among us? Who's doing stuff that we don't like because they're not one of us? And I tell you, for me, for you, for all of us, we have to remember that we're more likely to do this, and that this is not Jesus' way. That he says, I'm the resurrection and the life, and you're going to have to work really hard. You're going to have to take intentional action to make up your mind to not put any stumbling blocks in my way. You're going to have to watch out for this in the things that you do, because it's going to be your tendency. But I came to seek and save the lost, and there are people who fill these seats on Sunday who are still trying to find him. And there's a grocery store bagger who's trying to find him. And you may be that ambassador. You may be the messenger of reconciliation. So watch out for this. And I don't think it's because those guys did that and we don't. because we're more like them than anything else, because we've been around church a while, because we're church people. So because we're church people, we've been entrusted with a very, very strong and important message, and we build our lives on it. Some of us work. It's our vocation. It's our passion. But all of us have said that we have counted the cost and want to follow Jesus. And what Jesus says very strongly is always avoid us. It does not matter. Don't make things sacred that aren't sacred. Don't make your parking lot or your sign or your seats or your stage or your music sacred. Don't do this. Always it's about this. It's always about this. And you guys, it is such a strong passion of mine to say we can't make things sacred that aren't. We can't say, well, you're not one of us. I don't like that idea. We've got to always pursue that Jesus is about seeking and saving the lost. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Because if you do, I hope that you feel encouraged tonight to say, yes, it does matter. This is good work. It's work worth doing. The small things matter. The piece of trash outside matters. I want to do everything I can to make this a place where I remove obstacles so that people can hear the message. Because that's what the work we get to do. It's pretty cool. It's good work. So tonight, we are going to hear from Paige, our Praxis resident, is going to share a little bit, and KJ is going to assist her. Paige has a story, too, about how she came to Hope. She's going to share a little bit about that, and she's a singer and a songwriter, and we just thought, as a gift to you guys, to close our night together, that she would offer that song to you, just for you to experience with her. And I'm just going to pray for us before we do that, okay? So if you'd bow your heads. Father, we thank you for River Oaks. We thank you for the passion that's built this place, for the vision to want people to come as they are. And Lord, I pray that tonight, all of us together, those that you've called to this place, those that you've called to the message of reconciliation, to be ambassadors for you, God, that is a big job and an important one, Lord, and we want to take it seriously. And we want to be diligent in the work that you've given us to do, Lord. We pray that you would help us to have fresh eyes to see things the way that you see them. In any place that we've circled up, in our hearts, in our relationships, in our ministry, we pray that you would help us to just break that wide open and come into a new awareness, Lord. We pray that you give us eyes to see the people who are broken, who are seeking. Perhaps we'll be surprised. It might be someone who's been here since day one, Lord. We pray that we would have eyes for them, that we would stop and look at people in the face, that we would be about creating environments where every single person matters, that we would take our jobs really seriously, that we get to be grace and love and peace for people. I pray that we would be a praying people, that pray when we come, that pray fervently for the people who would be here, Lord. And I pray for revival among this church and this community, Lord. I pray that people who would come in here even this Sunday would experience your presence in a new and fresh way, not because of anything that we do, but because of who you are, Lord. We just submit ourselves to you, we commit ourselves to you, and we ask you to inspire us and invigorate us for your work. In your name we pray. Amen.